I'm Sarah Barsalou, Assistant Director at Regeneration Canada. You'll actually be hearing a little bit more about our organization today, as my colleague Gabrielle will be presenting as one of the panelists. So we are very extremely honored to be co-hosting this 4 per 1,000 meeting. And without further ado, I would like to introduce the chair and moderator of our session, Executive Secretary of the 4 per 1,000 initiative, Dr. Paul Lu. All yours, Paul.
Merci beaucoup, Sarah. Bonjour à tous. Aujourd'hui, j'ai pris le parti de commencer en français. Et puis, je continuerai peut-être un petit peu par l'anglais. Il faut faire travailler nos traducteurs, que je salue bien volontiers. Bienvenue donc à notre 4e session de la réunion régionale de l'initiative 4 pour 1000, qui a débuté lundi, avec une session dédiée aux politiques sur la santé des sols et la séquestration du carbone dans les sols, au niveau national et régional en Amérique du Nord. Cette réunion s'est poursuivie mardi avec une 2e session dédiée aux producteurs et hier avec une session consacrée aux scientifiques. Ainsi, durant cette 3e session d'hier, nous avons eu 5 présentations, les visions et prospectives de 2 professeurs de renom sur le stockage du carbone dans le sol au Canada et aux États-Unis, en la personne du professeur Derek Lynch de l'Université de Dalhousie et du professeur Keith Bastian de la Colorado State University. Et puis, une revue extrêmement complète des travaux scientifiques au Canada sur la modélisation du stockage du carbone dans les sols, sur son potentiel d'accumulation et sur la biodiversité des sols et son influence sur ce stockage de carbone, grâce au docteur Brandon Hugg de l'Université de Dalhousie, au docteur Émilie Maillard d'Agriculture et Agri-Food Canada au Québec et au docteur Louis-Pierre Comeau d'Agriculture et Agri-Food Canada au Nouveau-Brunswick. Les vidéos des sessions passées seront bientôt accessibles via notre site internet et notre chaîne YouTube qui est en cours de création. Et les présentations sont accessibles pour nos partenaires et nos membres sur notre plateforme collaborative et ont été adressées à tous les participants à cette réunion régionale. Aujourd'hui, notre session est consacrée à la société civile et aux ONG. Comme depuis le début de cette réunion régionale, notre session se déroulera donc en ligne, vous avez pu le constater, grâce à l'organisation logistique de nos amis de Regeneration Canada et à la contribution de l'ambassade de France à Washington, que je remercie chaleureusement pour leur implication et leur soutien. Pour rappel, l'objectif de cette réunion régionale est de donner la parole à tous les acteurs pouvant agir sur la santé des sols et la séquestration du carbone dans les sols, à savoir les décideurs, les agriculteurs, les forestiers, les scientifiques, les ONG et les entreprises. Chacun pourra exposer son point de vue et pourra interagir avec les autres. À l'issue de cette semaine de réunion, nous espérons être en mesure de proposer une synthèse sous forme de feuille de route régionale pour des actions concrètes sur le terrain en faveur du stockage du carbone dans les sols et la santé des sols via l'agriculture et la foresterie. Notre session d'aujourd'hui devrait durer 120 minutes afin de laisser un temps suffisant d'échange et nous disposerons toujours, comme l'a rappelé Sarah, du confort de la traduction simultanée en français et en anglais. Je précise que chaque session est enregistrée afin d'être également disponible pour ceux qui ne peuvent pas être des nôtres aujourd'hui. Comme nous sommes nombreux en ligne, nous utiliserons une configuration webinar, tous les micros et les caméras sont coupés par défaut, avec un chat pour les questions techniques, comme l'a rappelé Sarah, et une rubrique à votre disposition pour les questions-réponses aux orateurs. Merci, lorsque vous posez une question dans cette rubrique, de commencer en précisant à qui s'adresse cette question, afin qu'il soit plus facile pour nous de la poser en votre nom à la fin de la session. Même si vous n'êtes pas à l'origine de la question, vous pouvez toujours la liker, afin que nous identifions rapidement les questions les plus populaires à poser en priorité, notamment en cas de manque de temps. Comme nous le faisons depuis mardi, à la fin de la session, nous mettrons à votre disposition un sondage en ligne sous forme de QCM, questions à choix multiples, pour recueillir votre avis sur les quelques questions ciblées. Merci d'y répondre durant le laps de temps imparti, en limitant le nombre de réponses à 3, lorsque vous aurez la possibilité de donner plus d'une réponse. Pour ceux qui nous suivent depuis le début, vous avez déjà remarqué que certaines questions sont communes à chaque session et que d'autres sont propres à une session. Pour notre session d'aujourd'hui consacrée à la société civile et aux ONG, nous aurons donc 5 présentations de 15 minutes. Même si vous disposez dans l'agenda de leur biographie résumée, je serai reconnaissant à chaque intervenant de se présenter brièvement au début de leur présentation. Les présentations pourront se faire en anglais ou en français. Merci de choisir le canal souhaité au niveau du réglage Zoom de votre ordinateur, comme Sarah vous l'a souligné. Et les supports de ces présentations seront disponibles à la suite de notre réunion régionale. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Dr. Mamta MEHRA, Senior Fellow, Bio-sequestration Modeling of the Drawdown Project, for her presentation entitled The Role of Land and Farm Solution in the Implementation of the Drawdown Project. Dr. Mamta MEHRA, you have the floor.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. My name is Mamta MEHRA, and I'm the Senior Fellow with Project Drawdown, a leading think tank on climate solutions based in California, United States. So today I'll be focusing on the importance of land and food sector solutions in achieving drawdown, or basically how they can improve the soil health and carbon sequestration, building carbon both into the soil and the biomass. But before diving into that, I would like to introduce the term drawdown. So drawdown is a point in time when the concentration of atmospheric greenhouse gases begins to decline on a year-to-year basis. And we at Project Drawdown, which is a consortium of academicians, researchers, philanthropists, advisors across the globe, we are mapping, modeling, and measuring a collective array of substantive solutions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to achieve drawdown. And as of date, we have modeled close to 100 solutions from different sectors. It's transportation, buildings, energy, health and education. But today I'll be focusing on food and land sector. Let me show you the how much emissions is actually coming from this sector. So as per the latest IPCC report and other estimates, nearly 1/4 of the total greenhouse gas emissions are coming from food, agriculture, and land use, primarily from deforestation, methane emissions from livestock, rice cultivation, and there are a couple of other gas emissions from different operations we are doing conventionally on our cropland, grassland, and forest. So the key question we have is that how can we reduce the pressure on ecosystem and land while meeting the growing demand for food and fiber worldwide, along with addressing the issues of climate change? Our analysis at Project Drawdown, which is based on extensive meta-analysis of available information in the literature, in the peer-reviewed literature, have shown that we can find answers to that question by adopting these 4 pathways. The first one is protect ecosystem. It is very important to protect our intact primary ecosystems, grassland, forest, and don't allow any further degradation and deforestations for, for converting these primary ecosystem for food and biomass production. There is an equal importance to restore degraded land, just to restore them back to the intact state, whether it is wetlands or forest or grassland. And also there is enormous amount of degraded land available that can be restored for producing food and biomass, because eventually we need biomass, we need food to meet this growing demand from increasing population. But instead of getting that food and biomass from primary intact ecosystem, these restored degraded lands could be a better way to do that kind of a thing. And third, there is an important need to shift our agriculture practices from conventional to more regenerative one, which enable a system where we can reduce the emissions which are associated with different operations of conventional practices, as well as embed a more process where we can increase the sequestration, carbon sequestration, both in the soil as well as biomass. So there are a lot of practices which have more potential to sequester carbon, like agroforestry system and many others. And equally important is to address waste and diet, which plays a very, very important role in greenhouse gas mitigation from this sector, because nearly 30 to 40% of the food get wasted in different stages of production, distribution, retail, and consumption. So imagine if we somehow improve the efficiencies of these pathways, these different distribution channels, and somehow control that waste which is happening, we should be in a position to save a lot of resources like water, nutrient, labor, finances, etc., which is going for producing food, which is never going to be consumed at any end. And similarly, if we adopt as an individual dietary options for plant-based diet. I mean, I'm not saying that you should not consume meat, but if you prefer more of the plant-based diet along with the meat diet, then also it reduces greenhouse gas emissions associated with livestock production, which is a high energy intensity commodity compared to plant-based diet. Now, I'll give you a snapshot of, drawdown land and food sector framework to show that what are the different solutions, what we have analyzed as part of our different land types, which is primarily forest, grassland, and cropland. So here we have classified these broader land types into two categories, non-degraded and degraded one. The non-degraded forest ecosystems are meant for protection. So you can see all those solutions are mainly targeted to protect those primary ecosystems, whether they are forest or wetlands, peatland, and mangrove. The focus on the grassland and cropland non-degraded area is to produce food, but in a more efficient and sustainable way. So we can have annual solutions like conservation agriculture, regenerative annual cropping, improved rice production, SRI. Similarly, there are perennial systems which have other advantages along with sequestering carbon and reducing emissions, such as multi-strata agroforestry, tropical tree staples. And also, there are a lot of emissions coming from livestock production conventionally, but if we adopt silvopasture, managed grazing, they have a better way of reducing emissions, which is associated with the conventional way of grazing, and also sequester carbon into the soil and biomass, into the, biomass. While in the degraded area, the focus of these solutions is again on the forest to restore them back to the intact state, while in grassland and cropland, we have solutions which are, you can see that for biomass production, it is afforestation, bamboo, perennial bioenergy. You can have these tree plantation on degraded land areas. They provide you biomass, they provide a lot of opportunities for income generation, and they also prevent the land conversion, which is conventionally happening conventionally happening with the intact primary ecosystem. And similarly, there are some of the solutions which are saying that they are add-on because you don't need any additional land areas. For example, you can have micro irrigation system as part of our irrigation efficiency solutions on top of improved rice cultivation or conservation agriculture, silvopasture, anything. So this was all about food supply solution. There are solutions also on the food demand side, because also we have to see that whether are there any ways that we can see that if we can reduce that demand, which is increasing day by day with increasing population. So primary family planning and health and education, through these solutions, we have projected that the population can be controlled, and if that can be clubbed with plant-rich diet and reduce food waste, we are in a position to substantially reduce the demand for food. And this food supply and demand solution as a system gives us an insight that if we have all these solutions in place, both from supply side and demand side, we are in a position to sustainably produce both food as well as biomass to meet the growing demand for these two resources. Moving to the next, I am sharing you the snapshot of our top 20 drawdown solutions. This is an updated result released in March 2020. Our first set of results was released in 2017. You might have heard about the drawdown book. But again, the interesting fact is that land and food are top 10 solutions out of the top 20. And nearly at this time, we have updated 82 solutions. And if from that overall analysis, nearly 40% of the total emission impact is coming from the land and food sector. Isn't it amazing? Because most of the time, whenever solutions were asked and the primary focus was given on the electricity generation and other things, those are important, no doubt about that. But the thing is that we need to also acknowledge the importance of land and food sector. And I think these insights from Project Drawdown and from a lot of other organizations who are now working more and more nature-based solutions will influence the policymakers, decision makers, and as well as a lot of financial institutes to fund and to put in, to accelerate the things which are doing on the food and land sectors that will give momentum for the solutions coming under this category. Here is another analysis which is quite interesting. It shows that as part of our solutions and the analysis which we have done between 2020 to 2050, the relative impact which is coming from carbon sequestration is slightly higher than the emission reduction. That doesn't mean that emission reductions are not important. In fact, they are very important if we talk about the immediate and permanent benefits. But what I want to convey a message from this slide is that we have to look for practices which has potential for both, or, as both are important if we have to move to a more regenerative pathway and shift our practices, agriculture practices, from conventional to a drawdown one. And talking about the current and the future potential, you can see through this slide is that as of 2020, nearly the emissions which are coming from the food, agriculture and land use sector are much higher. Obviously, we don't have many of the climate solutions, drawdown solutions or nature-based solutions, whatever you call, are in place. But the interesting fact is that if we have these solutions in place between now and 2050, we are in a position to mitigate those emissions. In fact, we will be in a position to sequester more carbon, and that is quite interesting to know about that, especially reflecting the potential of the solutions coming from this sector. Some of the key insight from drawdown research is that yes, drawdown is possible. Many of you might be wondering that whether this analysis, what they have done is drawdown, which is a point in time in coming years where the atmospheric greenhouse gas emissions begins to decline on a year-to-year basis. Yes, that is possible before 2050, that our analysis has shown. However, to reach to that, we need a systemic approach. We need all of the solutions, not 20. We need all 100, all 82 solutions in place. And we have to also look into those solutions from a system, not individually, because there are a lot of interconnections and relationship between one sector to other sector and solutions from within one sector. There are a lot of overlapping in interactions, which is flowing from one way to other one. These climate solutions have many co-benefits. And one of that thing is that the financial analysis, what we have done is outweighing the cost. And nature carbon sink is equally important. I'm moving to the next one, which is quite important, is that how we can achieve drawdown. I've already explained in length about drawdown research, which is the core backbone. But let me give you a brief intro to drawdown learn, labs, communities, and partnership. So Drawdown Learn, it's a broad initiative where we are encouraging education and learning about climate solutions based on Project Drawdown's research, analysis, and insights. And I'm very happy to share with you that Project Drawdown Teachers Network, which is an online platform where educators are using drawdown solutions to teach students in K-12 schools, colleges, and universities. So all of those viewers who wants to include drawdown in their curriculum, please use this platform, meet, share, and collaborate with the other professional educators who are already member of this initiative. The next one is Drawdown Labs. It's a new consortium of visionary companies and partners who wants to adopt low carbon or negative carbon pathways by incorporating climate actions into their development plans. So Drawdown Labs will be a facilitator and help them to achieve that goal by adopting these focus areas, or by working on these focus areas strategy-wise. Drawdown Lab will develop new approaches and strategies that will help business to advance climate solutions. They will also, leverage the expertise of Project Drawdown staffs, our academic collaborators, and advisors. Drawdown Labs will also develop new tools, which is in collaboration, so that these business people can analyze, assess, and deploy climate solutions. We already have, close to 100 solutions, and that can also be customized to meet their specific requirement. And one thing is very important, and that is engagement, because it's good to have those tools and everything, but if you are not able to pass this to the wider audience, that there is no use of that. So as part of our engagement initiatives, we are working on a lot of communication channels. We are having new classes, webinars, multimedia packages, so that we can increase information and knowledge awareness on drawdown solutions. And at the last of this initiative is a broader voice. I mean, it's very, very important that we all can have a collective voice. So if Drawdown Lab, if those companies and business peoples will think in a similar line and will have a common voice, I think they will definitely be in a powerful position to shake the policymakers and the decision makers so that they can accelerate the adoption of climate solutions. Next is the drawdown communities that share a common interest and goal and are working towards drawdown by advancing climate solutions. I mean, you might be wondering, like, there are already, like, for example, City of Cincinnati, they have adopted drawdown framework in updating their 2018 Green City Plan. Similarly, Drawdown WNC is working on adopting and accelerating drawdown solutions in the southern Appalachian regions. In Drawdown Marine, they are actually reducing the local greenhouse gas emissions by involving everybody, individuals, community groups, schools, business, and government agencies. I think these are the examples which is coming from especially the grassroots one, and that motivates that if they can do, why not we? And lastly, there are Drawdown partnerships, which is focused on specific initiatives that promote broad public education engagements around the Drawdown framework. And that includes the research collaborations. So we have already started developing a global research collaborative platform, and hopefully that should be ready to share with everybody by the year end. It's a platform where we are building, where we are uploading all of our research data and everything, and it's a two-way process. Any user can use this data, our model framework, and they can also input data to that system. So it's a two-way process. And again, there's a need for public engagement collaborations where we are providing information, communicating, but also receiving feedback so that we can strengthen our research and all those other initiatives. And let me touch in my last slide, like how to bring about large-scale changes in the agriculture practices in support of soil health and carbon storage in Northern America. And I think I believe that we can find answer to this question possibly through the various drawdown initiatives. We need, a local and more from this region scientific evidences that can show the importance of different practices, which has potential to improve soil health and to improve carbon storage. We also need to communicate that in a very simple language so that we can have more awareness, both from the individual perspective as well as to provide that information to the policymaker, which Drawdown Learn is actually doing. We also need, in the Northern American region, all the stakeholders which are, really a focus of this area. They should collaborate together as part of something Drawdown Lab and work together and have, try to reinvent their business development pathways from the conventionals to more regenerative one, and have, practices which are promoting soil health and carbon storage into their system. And we need Drawdown communities, and we need more and more partnership and collaboration. So at last, I think I really want to congratulate 4 per 1,000, many Regeneration Canada, Soil for Climate. These organizations are doing really great work and touching a lot of the aspects of Drawdown initiative, which I've just talked about. The need of the hour is that all of us, who the viewers and everything, to collaborate and work so that we can have a regenerative futures for us as well as our future generations. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mamta. That was clear, and thank you for your last word about the cooperation and the work that the 4 per million and other NGOs are doing all over the world. We all try to go in the same direction. So I would like to remind to all participants that we will group the question to the speakers at the end of the session. You can ask your question and assign likes to the question that seems most relevant to you in the Q&A section, and we will deal with them in the order of preference that you decide. Our second speaker today is Mrs. Gabrielle BASTIEN, founder of Regeneration Canada and co-organizer of our regional meeting. So, dear Gabrielle, dear Gab, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's such a pleasure to be here. So here, let me just share my screen. Okay, here we go. All right, so hi everybody. Thank you so much again, Paul, for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, Mamta, as well, for such a great presentation, and I look forward to the next panelists as well. So I'm Gabrielle BASTIEN, the founder and executive director of Regeneration Canada, and my presentation will center around our approach in building a movement for soil regeneration in the country. So just a quick overview of our organization. So we're a 3-year-old nonprofit. We were established in 2017, and we're currently a small team of 4 employees. Our broad mission is to promote regenerative land management in Canada in order to mitigate climate change and foster healthy food systems. And before I jump to how we seek to achieve this as an organization, I first want to speak to how we see land management. So our entire approach is based on the premise that land management is a complex, interconnected system involving multiple different kinds of stakeholders. So obviously land managers and farmers have a direct impact on the land, but they respond to consumer demand, they get advice from agronomists, they're dependent on food distribution networks and on government policies. On the other hand, policymakers listen to scientists, to the media, and to public opinion. Businesses respond to consumer demand and have a large purchasing power themselves. And everyone is a citizen and consumes resources, listens to news, stories, art, and music. So that's why since our beginnings, our approach has been inclusive of all these stakeholders, because we consider that it's the entire system that needs to change, to shift. And even if land managers are central to the system, the number of them who implement regenerative practices will remain marginal if the rest of the system doesn't change. So how do we get there? What is needed to achieve soil regeneration at a pan-Canadian scale? Well, at this stage, there is still very little awareness of soil regeneration as a solution to climate change across all these stakeholder groups. Thankfully, we have seen much progress in that regard since we got started 3 years ago, which makes us very hopeful, but there is still much work to do. So for us, step one has always been that people need to know about it. If this is to become a largely implemented solution, all of these stakeholders I just mentioned need to be aware it's a solution that even exists. So our work so far has put an important focus on raising awareness. Then all of these people need to know what to do. So for farmers, this means, the actual practices, the techniques to implement on the ground, which is definitely key. But consumers also need to know where they can get regenerative goods and if there's any other way they can contribute. Businesses need to be able to know how to source regenerative products as well, for example. So we respond to this need through our educational initiatives and through building a network to connect people who have various kinds of expertise. Since we are a small team and we don't have all the answers, this cross-pollination within the network is really important to be able to achieve this. And then probably the most complicated thing, if we want to foster large-scale adoption of regenerative practices, is that people need to want to do this. So we all know between knowing and doing, there's always a big gap. So how do we get people to actually take action? Well, there are many factors at play here. First of all, it needs to be appealing as a solution. People need to be convinced of the benefits. There are many sociological factors at play as well, and policies that can enable this. So our specific way to contribute to this is by mobilizing people for them to take action. I'll explain more how we do this through the presentation, and also through network building, since we believe that building a movement of people who are demanding soil regeneration as a solution will ultimately contribute to changing policy. And last point before we move on to the next slide, so we consider it's very important for all of this work, our communication and educational work, to be grounded in scientific evidence. So our work is really to translate these scientific concepts to a diverse audience. So how does this translate into our goals? Well, in terms of awareness, our ultimate goal is for all Canadians to know what regenerative means and the relationship between soils and climate change. Like everyone knows what organic is now, we aim for this to be true for regenerative. For education, we seek to provide more in-depth information to these different stakeholders about how they can contribute. So this can be through presentations at our symposium, workshops, or webinars, for example, and these can be aimed at different kinds of audiences. And again, the wealth of expertise really lies in our network. So through network building, we seek to facilitate peer-to-peer learning and knowledge exchange, to facilitate collaborations, and to build a movement which will contribute to changing policies, we hope. And in terms of mobilization, so this means we seek to stimulate Canadians to take action in favor of soil regeneration. So among other things, focusing our messaging on storytelling and on success stories of real people in the movement definitely contributes to this. So now a few words on our approach in building a movement. We don't have tens of millions of dollars of advertising budget, yet we want to create public awareness. So we found it very useful to start by rallying the people who are already active in this sector. So there were already many existing initiatives in Canada when we got started. So whether farms or organizations involved in agroecology, for example. So through our first symposium and then other activities, we started by trying to rally these people and linking them up. And from there, it's easier to then gather people who might be open to these concepts, but just didn't know about it. So people already interested in environmental matters, for example, or people who might be more inclined, people who are innovative or creative, for example. And then from there, you have a critical mass of change makers, which makes it easier to afterwards try to convince the next layer of people who may have been less open to these concepts initially. So another way to put this is, accepting the stages of technology adoption, to echo Tori's presentation the other day, which I really enjoyed. And starting by gathering the innovators and early adopters to build a movement, and not trying to start by the late majority. Even if we know that transitioning large-scale conventional farms is probably where we can get the most potential impact, these people will be more inclined to shift once there's already a movement going. But the good news is, as our organization evolves, we have been getting more and more opportunities to go into more conventional circles, which is great. And so, all of this work would never be possible without all of our partners and other members of our network. So this is a screenshot of some of the nonprofit partners we work with, including many who are here today, for 4,000, Soil for Climate, and Equiterre, among others. And we also have many members and advisors that we consult with. So working with these different organizations and individuals who have specific expertises is really key to us being able to do our work. So now more concretely, what is it we do in terms of activities to achieve this? Well, in terms of communications, we have a strong presence online through different social media, as well as our two websites, regenerationcanada.org and livingsoilsymposium.ca. We have a newsletter list that we reach out to on a regular basis. And we've also produced several video media, such as you see some screenshots here on the slide, including our Soil Guardians web series about Canadian regenerative farmers, and our Soil Champions video that we made in partnership with Equiterre. So all of this contributes to raising awareness, to educating people about what they can do and mobilizing them. And this is true for all stakeholders. And we found that having a positive message focused on solutions is really key to mobilizing people. And being inclusive is a really important value of ours too. That's really crucial to our approach. We think that all people can contribute to this, and we encourage everyone to take steps in the right direction. And also making our message accessible to a diverse crowd is crucial to reach our broad audience as well. Now, in terms of educational initiatives, we host workshops for various audiences. For example, we've done workshops for elementary school students, for farmers, for the general public and gardeners, but for students in agricultural programs as well, and in different parts of Canada too. We host webinars on various topics and geared at different people as well. It's always great, having online events, as we've learned recently, is great to gather a broad audience. And we have different educational materials as well. So we do public speaking at several kinds of events, and also have a presence at other events. So two recent ones that we're excited about, since it's a testimony of the interest of a more diverse crowd for this topic, are my colleague Ananda went to speak at the Ontario Canola Growers Association recently. And last November, my colleagues Antonius and Sarah went to Agribition, which is a large beef show in Saskatchewan that gathers tens of thousands of people over a week. And they were there to discuss regenerative agriculture, which was a really fantastic learning experience. So all of this is a great way to provide more in-depth information to different crowds about what they can do to contribute. So now our membership, so our mechanism to gather the network and put people in touch. So we have diverse organizational members who have visibility on a directory on our website. So this enables our community to get a better understanding of which organizations provide which kinds of services or products, and in which part of Canada as well. Then we have our diverse individual members, so farmers, gardeners, agronomists, students, researchers, name it. And all of these people are put in touch through our online platform to foster exchanges in collaboration. And as I've mentioned before, we do consult with our member base around different projects. And actually, this is a project that we're working on right now that we're really excited about, which we're doing for and with our members. So we will be going through a round of consultation with our members around this shortly. So this is an interactive map of regenerative farms in Canada. So we think one of the big gaps right now to scale up regenerative agriculture is recognition of regenerative products on the market. So we're trying to partially bridge that gap with this map, which will connect producers and consumers, helping consumers know where to get such and such products if they want to buy from producers who are implementing regenerative practices. And since farmers will list which practices they do as well, we think this will also be an opportunity to facilitate peer-to-peer learning among them. So yeah, this is a project we're very excited about and that we're aiming to launch by the end of this year. And last but not least, our Living Soil Symposium. So our symposium is really a big celebration of all things relating to soil regeneration. And it's been a really great way for us to achieve all aspects of our mission. So from awareness to education to network building and mobilization. So through the symposium, we've been able to gather a large, diverse audience around this topic. We always have, many farmers, agronomists, scientists, students, business people from all kinds of businesses, community organizers, government representatives, and many, many just engaged and curious citizens. And it's also helped us gain media attention, so further enabling us to raise awareness about this topic. We always gather a diversity we always address a diversity of themes. So, from the science to the practices, from some business applications to what citizens can do, for example. And we also have a diversity of session formats. So some being more information-based and others more focused on discussion so that all members of our audience really have something to gain from this, whether they're new to the topic or whether they're already experts. And inviting, inspiring, innovative speakers is really key in providing quality content as well at the symposium. Fostering networking and collaborations between participants is a really important part of our event. So usually for in-person event, we have networking cocktails and long lunch breaks to facilitate this. And now for our last symposium that we just finished last week, which happened virtually, we were glad to have an event mobile app which allowed participants to get in touch with one another. Our 6 month later survey from last year's event showed us that every person present at the symposium made on average 1 to 2 new collaborations through the event. So new people that they met with whom they started collaborating professionally. So we're really, really happy about this. And having an inspiring, inviting atmosphere definitely adds to the powerful experience participants have at the symposium. And we think that this is a really important aspect if we want to mobilize people to take action. So we usually incorporate art among other things, but just generally speaking, we try to foster, positive, inclusive atmosphere and foster participation from everyone too. So all of this is really geared towards motivating people to get involved and take action in a way that makes sense for them. And we're really happy to say that 98% of our participants from last year's event took action after the symposium from the 6 month later survey that we sent. So taking action can mean starting a new project or joining a project related to this, incorporating what they learned in their work or implementing new regenerative practices on their farm, or becoming an advocate and talking about this around them. So we're very proud of this. For a few results for this year's online event, we gathered 800 people from around 12 countries or potentially even more, which is incredible. So taking the event online actually allowed us to gather a broader audience, which is really amazing. And here you can see some photos of our first 2 editions in 2017 and 2019 when we gathered 400 and 500 people respectively. So now to conclude, what is needed for the future of the movement, or in other words, to scale up regenerative land management? Well, we think that providing technical skills training for farmers will be absolutely key for what's next. So once awareness is starting to be there, once there's a growing number of people that want this solution, the people working the land really need to be able to access technical training for a diversity of practices, of crops, and of types of livestock. Then the recognition of regenerative products. So as I mentioned, this is something we think is a big gap right now. And for consumers and businesses to be able to get involved, it's crucial for them to be able to know how to put their money in the right place and purchase regenerative goods. And incentives for farmers. So we think it's key that regenerative farmers get compensated for sequestering carbon. And this could happen through policy as well, among other types of solutions. So these are all things Regeneration Canada is interested in contributing to in one way or another, since we think they are crucial for the future of the movement. So this is it. Thank you so much, everyone, and looking forward to the discussion afterwards.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. That was very interesting to listen about your vision and how you evolved with the time since the first time we met, but I'm sure we're all going in the same direction. That's the main things.
Thank you.
Okay, so for all our participants, I would like to remind you that we will be grouping the question at the end to the speaker at the end of the session. And you can like the question that seems the most relevant to you. So already some of you already did it in the Q&A section. So now let me give the floor to Mr. Klaus Mager from Business Climate Leader for a focus on agriculture. Mr. Klaus Mager, you have the floor.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm a volunteer for Business Climate Leaders. We are an organization that works with industry leaders to talk about the need to get a handle on climate change. We have resources here for our groups of volunteers, where you can see we have divided the economy into sectors, and we have volunteer leaders in each one of these sectors who are typically, like myself, retired executives from within the industry they're representing. So this is agriculture here, and I'm the sector leader for agriculture, but I'm working with a team of farmers and scientists. We have been partnering for several years already. I've been with the organization for 6 years. And we have developed here a series of toolkits and PowerPoint presentations and argumentations to equip our volunteers with tools that enable them then to sit down with a business and talk about the need to focus on climate change. This presentation here is a macro level understanding of the industry sector agriculture that we have developed here. And it is really an umbrella understanding of our insights into the industry. So we are an initiative that was started by Citizens Climate Lobby. Citizen Climate Lobby, 180,000 members worldwide, has a sole focus, and the organization has focused on this for 10 years, 10 plus years, and that is a carbon fee and dividend. The specific bill is already introduced. Canada already has, and it has carbon fee and dividend implemented. We have HR 763 ready to go. The idea here is that we are putting a fee on fossil fuel at the source, where we are distributing the revenue to all households, making it revenue neutral, and we have a border adjustment to create fair trade with other nations that may or may not have an equivalent carbon fee. Business Climate Leaders is focused on influencing the influencer. The political process is mostly dominated by corporate, by business interests. And so we have to engage with these businesses to convince them that there is a good reason to really engage with climate change, and we're explaining how the climate change is already impacting their business and in particular focused on agriculture. We're also talking about carbon pollution, not just climate change itself. So businesses care about consumers, and consumers care about the environment. They care about public health, animal welfare, their own health, and they care about the need for carbon sequestration increasingly. So that is where really the educational need is greatest. So talking about environmental degradation, just to give you a few examples here, the United States has lost about 1/3 of its topsoil in the last 40 years. It's an astounding thing to watch. Mostly really starting with the use of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, which is made from natural gas, which then requires the use of pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides to protect these crops from predation. The impact of that has been the loss of soil organic matter, which leads to a complete depletion of the soil and the loss of soil, washing out into the rivers and into the oceans. The same synthetic nitrogen fertilizer also causes enormous algae blooms, which are visible from satellite images. At the end of the Mississippi River Delta, for example, you have dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico, all up and down the coast of Florida, massive algae damage, which depletes the water of oxygen and causes sea life to perish. Lake Erie, for example, has massive algae bloom. They're calling it the green slime. And for some reason, people don't link this phenomena with the runoff from the agricultural fields. Another issue is aquifers that are being pumped beyond their natural replenishment rate, really worldwide. That is a phenomenon in India and China, everywhere. But here in the United States, we're looking at California, the Oglala aquifer, which stretches across several states in the Midwest, is being pumped beyond its replenishment rate to grow corn for biofuel. Okay. Some really bizarre things that are being defended and that evade a macro perspective, of a systemic perspective of how that system is doing such an amazing damage. We could go on with a long list, but here this is basically the environmental component, degradation, that currently is caused by the way we are growing our food. When we come look at public health, the loss of organic matter in the soil has degraded the nutritional value of food. So today we have roughly 2 billion people on the planet that are obese, but hundreds of millions are at the same time nutrient deprived, which at this particular moment is a public health issue, because the virus really is far more lethal to people who are obese, who have inflammation in their system, which is due to the consumption of degraded nutritional foods and processed foods that are typical in our diet. And that link is not being discussed really as it should be, because you have millions of people trying to go back to work, but being exposed to this virus, and the only real defense we have at this moment is our own personal resilience, which is so much linked to the way we consume food. Manure from current livestock practices is another, to me, mind-blowing issue here. We have CAFOs that have tens of thousands of animals. When you think about a pig, for example, producing 3 to 5 times the amount of manure as a human being, and we have farms that, or CAFOs that are featuring 50, 60,000 animals, that is the manure of a city. But it's being untreated, put out into the environment, causing air pollution, food contamination through E. coli, water contamination. veterinary trucks are bleeding into the food supply because the animals being held in such crowded conditions need antibiotics and growth hormones and to keep them prophylactically, healthy. Those chemicals are bleeding into the food supply. Another which I haven't listed here is the phenomena that American mothers, to a significant portion, have glyphosate in their breast milk. There are glyphosate traces in urine samples across the population. So these things are highly alarming to people who may have heard about this for the first time. And the third topic, why we are focusing on agriculture now so intensely, really is the need for carbon sequestration. There is really no viable alternative. We have seen many proposals coming through that were presented to our organization about various schemes for carbon sequestration. All of them require enormous amounts of capital, trillions of dollars, if that was to be rolled out on a planetary scale, a global scale. And they don't really fix anything. They're just treating a symptom as opposed to going to the root cause or that of where of what is really causing this pollution. So that all then brings us to we are promoting or supporting the idea of regenerative organic agriculture, changing agricultural practices towards regenerative organic solves a range of problems. It builds organic matter in soil, it increases the nutritional value of food, it restores life and habitats, it retains water, prevents soil runoff. But most importantly, and this is really what is our core argument here, as we are entering a phase of carbon pollution and 450 ppm of CO2 here in the atmosphere, we need to buy time because there's no practical way that we could achieve the IPCC targets of going carbon neutral by 2050 without sequestration of carbon. It has to go both ways. We have to pull some of that carbon back out of the atmosphere. There's no practical way that the energy systems could turn neutral, carbon neutral in this time frame. And even if they were able to do it, there's still too much carbon already in the atmosphere. So we must absolutely think about sequestration, and the only practical way to do that, as I was saying, really is through land use management on a broad scale, starting, really also with agriculture. So with that, we're coming to, I'm sorry, with that, that was too fast. So with that, we're coming to our bill, HR 763. And the argumentation here really is that the industrial form of agriculture is creating enormous externalities that are costly to society, but they're not recognized and accounted for at the source. And as I was laying out, the externalities created in the ecosystem is one issue, and that's already in and by itself enough reason, but also the way we grow our food and process our food causes pathologies in the population. So it is for so many reasons a must fix it thing. But the two topics have to be combined, because if what we see right now in many applications, if we focus on creating functional foods that promote health and so on, that doesn't take care of nature. So we have to fix the food system for people, you know, as we are talking about healthy foods for people, with the idea of fixing the healthcare system at the same time. So for that reason, we do support added incentives for industrial farmers to convert, which means we want them, you know, to get paid for sequestration of carbon. There are already exchanges available, NORI, Territory, state initiatives. The important part here is that the organic farmer at this point in time comes in at a higher cost base. If we can find ways to pay the farmer for carbon farming, that allows them to sell their food at comparable market competitive practices. There is so much, the core argument is there is so much innovation bottled up, ready to go, but companies that can't go to scale because the market is bottled up and not in their favor. Our bill has been supported now by thousands, literally thousands of economists, former chairs of the Federal Reserve, Nobel laureate economists. There is general consensus that this is the way to go to increase the price of fossil fuels, put the thumb on the scale, so to have companies then exit. If the farmer is starting to pay significantly more money for synthetic nitrogen fertilizer made from natural gas and pesticides made from oil, now it will encourage innovation into regenerative forms of farming that do not use these chemicals. So with that, I'm giving you back my screen, which, sorry, stop share, good.
Thank you very much, Klaus. This is what citizens can do if they want to mobilize to try to enforce some law and some rules. So that's interesting. It's a kind of action that is interesting and going in the way we want to go. Many questions arrive on the Q&A section, and I recall you that you could vote to make them coming up in the list, but I will pick up one or two questions for each speaker anyway at the end of the presentation. So our next speaker is Mr. Seth ITZKAN, co-director and co-founder of Soil for Climate, who will demonstrate that there is a hope under our feet. The soil is a solution for climate. We're all convinced of that, but Seth, please, you have the floor.
Hello, everybody. Let me get the presentation mode here. Oh, and share the screen, right? Let me do this. Share screen, PowerPoint, share, and now put PowerPoint into presentation mode. Hang on here. Yes, is everyone seeing the presentation and hearing me now? We're getting the thumbs up, very good. Okay, so hello everyone, my name is Seth ITZKAN. I'm the co-founder and co-director of Soil for Climate. My colleague Carl Tiedemann and I started this nonprofit in 2015, and our objective is to advocate for soil as a climate solution and to help enact the policies, practices, and paradigms, if you will, to make it happen. And it is a great honor for me to be here today in this 4 per 1,000 session. Oh, I'm sorry, I should speak slower for the translators. And I want to give a special nod of appreciation to Dr. Paul Liu of 4 per 1,000 and to Gabrielle BASTIEN of the Regeneration Canada program. And they're the hosts for this. And I also want to give a special shout out to the Soil for Climate Facebook group members who are watching today. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to wear two hats, if you will, today. First is sort of the science hat to talk about soil as a climate solution, but at a perspective that maybe is different than you've heard. And also to talk about the advocacy of our nonprofit, and particularly our Kenya project. Some of you know we're getting involved in a project in Kenya now, and we're really excited about that. That is a great hope for us. Let me move on to the next slide. Basically, any opportunity I have to show the picture of the whole Earth, I'm going to do so. We're really fortunate as a species. We're fortunate to have this picture. It was serendipitous. It happened to be a whole Earth when it was taken, and it tells quite a bit. Certainly, we are mostly an ocean planet. That's one of the stories that this picture tells. But on the part of the planet that is land, most of it is grasslands. So I want you to sort of get that. We're mostly a grasslands planet on the part that is land, and the grasslands play a huge role in regulating the climate, and we'll get into more of that, of course. And so here you go. This is just a wonderful slide. I love to start with this. This is from an exhibit called Exposed: The Secret Life of Roots at the United States Botanical Garden. Excuse me. You can see just the cross-section of the grasslands there. It's just a perfect illustration, and you can see how deep the roots are. And this is a classic soil, a temperate grassland ecosystem, and a huge store of carbon. And this slide basically shows the magnitude of carbon that is in soil. 2,300 gigatons, 2,300 gigatons, yes, 2,300 billion tons. If you look in the lower left, it shows the carbon in soil. Obviously, there's too much to get into here with all the detail, but you get the point. We can talk about more of these later. This slide, basically what I want to get to here is not the actual numbers, but the sort of the sinks and sources and sinks. This is sort of that's the purpose of this slide, is to show that of the source of carbon that's coming from humans through emissions, there's only 3 sinks. Now the numbers have changed. It's already closer to 11 now in terms of the gigatons of carbon of emissions. But there's only 3 sinks. There's the oceans, the atmosphere, and what they call the terrestrial sphere. And 2 of them are bad. In the oceans, it becomes carbonic acid. In the atmosphere, of course, it creates the greenhouse effect. But on the land, the terrestrial sphere is a good thing. We want that, and we want more of that. So the answer to global warming, climate change, is really to reduce the 2 bad ones and to increase the better ones. So that's a sort of a simplified way of seeing it. And this is a paper from Susan Solomon from 2009 called The Irreversible Climate Change Due to Carbon Dioxide Emissions. Susan Solomon is a professor at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And the key here is the phrase largely irreversible for 1,000 years after emissions stop. So she's making the point that even if we stop emissions, which we have to do, it continues to warm for 1,000 years at least. And then here's where the graphs, and the bottom right is the thermal expansion. It's basically because the heat is getting trapped in the oceans. So the oceans is a huge part of the thermodynamics of the planet, and it will continue to expand and warm for at least 1,000 years, even after our emissions stop. And then the top left is the CO2 in terms of parts per million. This is a picture of Susan Solomon. Okay, now, 4 years later, the IPCC released this statement. A large fraction of anthropogenic climate change resulting from CO2 emissions is irreversible. I wonder where they got that word from, on a multi-century to millennial timescale. So clearly the IPCC is citing Susan Solomon, her 2009 paper. But look at this part that the IPCC added, except in the case of a large net removal of CO2 from the atmosphere over a sustained period. You see, bang. They've added that second part of the sentence. It's largely irreversible, except in the case of a large net removal. And where is that large net removal? Well, of course, it's in soil. You can literally see it. I'm just going to try and go quickly here. Okay, now basically we know what some of the best practices are for increasing soil carbon. Reforestation, I'll just go through these quickly. Reforestation, organics, no-till cover cropping, biochar. We don't hear enough of that actually, but we need to hear more of it. And of course, my favorite and the favorite of Soil for Climate is using livestock as a proxy for wild herds, and sort of the whole holistic planned grazing methodology, which we're big advocates for. And we're such big advocates for it because it is such a large part of the world. So much of the world is in a degraded grassland system, or even a system which is today, we just call it desert. It used to be a thriving grassland ecosystem, or semi-arid grassland ecosystem, and it needs to be again. And the way to do that is with proper grazing. And so we've put a lot of effort into learning more about this. And I have personally been to the Africa Center for Holistic Management in Zimbabwe many times. I've lost track. I've been going there pretty regularly since 2011. And so I took this picture myself, multi-species herds being managed in a way which replicates as a facsimile for the indigenous wild herds that these grasslands co-evolved with in the first place. And here you can see just a perfect example of the efficacy of this work. You can see the healthy grassland on one side of the fence and the desert on the other. You know, oh, they just happen to put that fence right at the boundary of the grassland of the desert. Well, I call this the paradigm fence, because there really is a different paradigm in how we're thinking about land management. One is exacerbating global warming, the other is mitigating it. And you can see that from space. So that previous slide, I'll go back to that. This is from Google Earth. You can literally see it from space. You can see the efficacy of this from space. And so personally, I just lose a little patience when I hear people still questioning the efficacy of the savory work and holistic plant grazing. It's the most obvious thing in the world. It's obvious on the ground. It's obvious in space. It clearly works. We need to do much more of it. Here's examples of the restoration in process over time. So starting from 2014 and going to 2013. Now these pictures are taken in the dry season. What's important is not the color of the cover. You know, so if it's rainy, it may be green. The fact is of the cover itself. The fact that you went from a desert situation to a situation which is 100% covered in grass. That's the germane piece of information in this slide. And then, so here's sort of just a sort of a close-up. And then that's me at this spot itself after the restoration. And then, okay, so just sort of showing off here, but it really is a joy, frankly, speaking from my heart. It is a joy to stand in a place that is recovered. And there's high climax grass here. It's called Panica maximum. It's called a high succession grass. It only grows in a really healthy ecosystem. So it's an indicator of healthy soil, which of course means that there's more carbon in the soil and there's more water cycles happening, you know, small water cycles. So it's a success story. And of course there's more food and the cows are fatter, and it's a win-win-win. It's not just soil carbon. There are so many other dimensions by which it is a win. And then here's sort of another example. We call this the elbow site. You can see it sort of looks like an elbow there, that tree in the middle. And then And then here's the restoration. Again, okay, so I have 5 minutes, thank you. Okay, so you get the point. We know that, that land can be recovered. This is Gabe Brown, is one of the sort of the hero practitioners in the United States. He's in North Dakota. He's improved the soil on his land from approximately 2% to as high as 8% soil organic matter. That's huge. I mean, that should be the cover of the New York Times. Like, everyone in the world should know that he's done that. And he's done it with holistic plant grazing and the savory method, and integrated with cover crops and with a soy rotation. So when my wife, oh, I'm sorry, okay, we don't have time to hear the video. Okay, and then, so here, just some number crunching here. If 8% soil organic matter is 76 tons of carbon per acre to 12 inches. And that's a 57 ton per acre increase over the 2% that he started with. So he's almost 60 tons per acre he's added to his ranch over about 5,000 acres, 14,000 tons per year, by the way. So it's an amazing success story. You know, here we get into the science, and as usual, we don't have time. But the key thing you want to see here is that temperatures have decreased significantly on a planet scale over the last 30 to 40 million years because of the evolution of grasslands and ruminants and ungulates. So that coevolution of basically grazing mammals and grassland soil is what has led to the cooling of the planet over the last 30 to 40 million years. And then the last 10,000 years or so, at the far right there where it gets kind of flat, that's called the Holocene. And we actually have prevented an ice age from coming. And then that's because of agriculture. So ruminants and grasslands created soils, I got it, 2 minutes, which cooled the planet. But then in the last 10,000 years, agriculture has helped keep the planet warm when it should have cooled. And I apologize that I won't have time to go into all the science here, but these are just some seminal papers. Greg Ritalik, Global Cooling by Grassland Soils of the Geological Past and Near Future. Please familiarize yourself with this work. He's basically showing what I just said. The evolution of grasslands and ruminants has led to global cooling over the last 30 to 40 million years. And then here's a paper by Zhang on showing the CO2 decrease over the last 30 to 40 million years, corresponding also with the evolution of ruminants and grasslands. And then here's a slide that Carl Tiedemann and I made together, sort of a composite slide showing the work of Ritalik and Zhang together. And then you can really see you know, how it all works. And don't have time to get into the science here anymore. Basically, we've been holding off an ice age for 10,000 years. Let me just talk very quickly about, you know, our organization that we love. You know, we're an advocacy group, and we're with Bill McKibben, of course, and we stand with the traditional climate movement, if you will, the decarbonization of the energy system movement, while we also advocate for the recarbonization of soil. So decarbonization of energy, recarbonization of soil, and this is us around the world, including at COP21, the Paris Climate Accords, and just want to, working with kids, just trying to make it sort of fun. We do poetry, we do music, as well as the hardcore science. And so our project in Kenya, it's called Enkup Osaligi. It stands for the Promised Land in Maasai. We're working with a Maasai village and a Maasai herder to do holistic plant grazing there. And so we've done the savory training. Okay, it's over. Well, all right, let me just end on this. I just love that we are doing this Kenya project, and I thank everybody who has helped support it. And this is my colleague, Dalmas Tiampati's son. His name is Chichi Tiampati, and they've adopted me into the family, and that's my hope for the future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Seth. Very sorry we have a limited time. We can hear you for ages, but well, we have to stop at once. Your presentation will be available for all the people who are participating, and that will be the complete set. Of course, we will miss your explanation, but there are some beautiful pictures that don't need any comment, and also some sketch and graph that also explain themselves. So thank you very much, Seth, for that presentation, and stay with us for some question at the end. So I just would like to remind our participant that we will be grouping the question to the speaker at the end of the session. You can still ask a question and assign likes to the question that seems the most relevant to you in the Q&A section to make it easy to deal with them in order of preference. Our last speaker today will be Mrs. Karen Ross, Policy and Program Manager for Agriculture at Equiterre, who will talk about agriculture for climate, barriers and opportunities for healthy soil in Canadian agriculture. Mrs. Karen Ross, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. Hi, everybody. I'm a bit of a weird one. I'm joining by phone today, and I'm counting on the team at Regen Canada to advance the slides for me. So just to confirm, Tony, Sarah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Thank you. Okay, great. So hi, everyone. As Paul mentioned, I'm Karen Ross, and I'm a program manager at Equiterre. Equiterre has been working for the past 25 years, predominantly in Quebec, on issues related to climate change and agriculture. I myself work at a federal level on public policies related to agriculture, and I'm thrilled to share that this past fall, together with 3 colleagues at Equiterre, we were able to launch a new program that links these 2 central focuses at Equiterre. So now we have quite a large program actually focused in on agriculture's role as part of Canada's climate solution, and we have a specific focus in on soil health. So I'd like to move to the second slide now. And one of the central
So Karen, we have a problem to hear you.
Oh, thanks, Paul. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, great. Thank you. So I was saying we were asked how, kind of what's the role of NGOs in promoting soil health? And I was just about to say that throughout this week we've heard that this is obviously very important based on the science, and we also know that some farmers are already doing great things to improve soil health on their farms. But we also know that there's not yet widespread adoption in Canada. So one of the biggest questions we ask ourselves is, well, why not? And as many of our colleagues have identified already this week, well, it's because there's significant barriers to adoption. So for us at Equiterre, one of the roles we see that we can play is to kind of play a central role in advancing the supportive conditions that help to reduce those barriers and encourage opportunities that may lead to a more widespread transition that we all want to see. So for us, it's about collaborating across diverse groups of stakeholders, so from scientists to agronomists and farmers, decision makers in the food industry, that we will actually get there. So we've pulled together back in the fall an advisory committee of experts from across the country that spans all of those different expertise that I just mentioned. They represent nearly every province in Canada, and together we've worked to identify some of the key elements of what it would mean to advance the supportive conditions for improved soil health in Canada. And first and foremost, we land on supportive policy environments. For us, well, we strongly believe that farmers need to be well supported in their transition. We need to remember, of course, that farmers are producing food in an already very high-risk environment, and to adopt new practices can be indeed a kind of a means of adding risk, at least in the short term. So we're working with collaborators and, well, collaborating directly with the government, actually, to think about improvements to public policies that exist in Canada to continue to prioritize the role of soil health as being part of Canada's climate solution in agriculture. So Mrs. Clearwater from Agriculture Canada on the first day of this symposium actually mentioned some of our work, and I'll just dive into a bit of the details of who we're working with and what we're thinking about. On this slide in particular, I just want to focus in on two of the central policies we're looking at, and Mrs. Clearwater also mentioned these. So the first one is the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change, which was Canada's first climate plan announced in 2015. And the second one is the Canadian Agricultural Partnership. So Mr. Trudeau's government has announced that they're going to increase some of the objectives in the climate plan in the near future, and they've identified the role of agriculture as being an important priority in this. Secondly, in terms of the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, this is a 5-year federal public policy, and the new one will be launched in 2023. So I want to encourage everyone who's on this call in Canada to think about what we want to see in this Canadian Agricultural Partnership to continue to prioritize the role of soil health, because really this is our last chance before we get to the Paris Agreement. It's not quite the last chance. There's going to be another one in 2028, but we'll only be partway through it. So we really look to this framework to continue to improve the role of soil health and farmers' role in sequestering carbon into Canadian soils in this particular framework. So how do we think about public policies? I'll move on to the next slide. Well, it's quite complicated, actually. So it's kind of a multi-step process for us, where first we start off by doing some in-depth research into what exists in policies in Canada, what other jurisdictions are doing differently in terms of public policies, and then we also look into the science on both soil health practices as well as the barriers to adoption. From that research, then we engage with diverse sets of stakeholders. So this picture here is just one example of what we've done. This is a workshop that we hosted in Guelph, Ontario, specifically focused on improving efficient use of nitrogen fertilizers and the links to soil health and broader nutrient management. So we pulled together multiple levels of government, industry, farmers and farmer groups, agronomists, conservationists, and others. And we asked them to discuss some of the policy options that we were presenting. So we essentially did a summary of some of the best management practices. We asked for feedback on what they were doing in their fields, if they were land managers themselves. And then we presented what we thought could be some new additions to the policy frameworks that exist in Canada and opened it up for discussion. It was incredible the kind of feedback we got. And one of the central things that I learned from this is that no matter how diverse the room, people were tending to be in agreement on many fronts. So we got a lot of information out of this, and we continue to collaborate with Agriculture Canada, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada to advance these recommendations. I'll move on to the next slide then. So we're on to slide 4 now. Another component for us in terms of advancing supportive conditions has been mentioned by many of our peers already at this conference. Public communications are really important because I think I think climate change can feel very overwhelming for many people. And we have a great story of success, a story that helps to inspire hope that there can be solutions that are really literally under our feet. And we see an important opportunity to celebrate farmers who are doing great things on their land to try to encourage a more widespread transition. This isn't only to get kind of a constituency of citizens who hope that decision makers will support these things through policy change, but it's also to encourage other farmers to think about what they're doing on their land and maybe to encourage them to do something differently. So here on this slide, you just see one example of something that we've done in partnership, with leadership from Regeneration Canada. Gabrielle and her team, we were able to produce a video with a celebrity chef. Some of you may recognize him from Montreal. And I encourage you to go to Regeneration Canada's website to see this video. Ultimately, it celebrates about, there's probably about 8 different producers or so in this video in Canada who are doing different things on their land to improve their soil carbon. I'd like to move on to the next slide. So one other thing that we're doing is really outreach and demonstration. So this is encouraging peer-to-peer leadership on farm. So with my colleague Nadine Bachand from Equiterre, she's on the line as well. She's leading a really exciting project with MEHRA, which is one of the lead research institutes on agro-environment research in Quebec. as well as with a grouping of agronomists to lead some showcases. In French, we call them vitrines on farms to help to spread the adoption of practices that encourage soil health. So this year, of course, as a result of COVID, the demonstrations will be moved to a virtual setting. So we're thinking about things like videos and podcasts in order to share the news. But hopefully over the span of this 3-year project, we'll see increased adoption of some of these soil health practices across some farms in Quebec. Again, here the point is to celebrate champion farmers and position them as leaders in the agriculture sector in Quebec. Move on to the next slide then. This one moves, I suppose, to the next level of collaboration with farmers. So we strongly believe that farmers can be a lead voice in terms of policy change, but oftentimes there's many other voices at the table at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So a new coalition has launched this past winter. So on National Agriculture Day in February, Farmers for Climate Solutions launched in order to be a platform or a gathering of, to support farmers who believe that they can make a difference for climate change in Canada and who want to request policies to support them to encourage the widespread transition that we want to see in Canadian agriculture. So I'll move on to the next slide to discuss this just a little more. At this point, we have a membership of about a dozen members in Canada, and it's growing literally weekly at this stage. And we're working collaboratively to, well, for one, put farmers' voices first in terms of policy change. And we're focusing on 4 central policies. So the first one is improving soil health, the second being enhancing biodiversity, the third, reducing emissions generally, but that specifically speaks to improving efficient use of nitrogen fertilizers and reducing high carbon inputs like diesel on farms, and also improving livestock. So through some of the things that we've heard many of our peers talk about in terms of livestock on pastures and grasslands. I'll encourage any of you to reach out if you think you as a farmer would like to be part of this, or if any of your organizations may be a good fit to this new initiative in Canada. I should mention that some of the great folks who are on at this symposium are already members, like Regeneration Canada. So I'll move on to the next slide now. The final thing that I want to mention here is that, Farmers for Climate Solutions and the work at Equiterre is indeed focusing in on soil health, but we're trying not to lose sight of focusing in solely on sequestering carbon for the need to also have that paired with other emission reductions. So I just want to note that certainly here in Canada, the fastest growing emission in the ag sector are around nitrous oxide, predominantly as a result of nitrogen fertilizer, and methane predominantly associated with animal agriculture. So soil health presents a whole bunch of solutions and co-benefits to help resolve some of these things. But I just want to be sure, well, in all of our work, we're ensuring that we're not just thinking about policies and communications that focus only on carbon and carbon sequestration, but rather are much more holistic in thinking about co-benefits and other potential emission reductions that can go along with improved soil health. So I'll move on to the next slide. Dr. Paul Liu had asked us some questions around what we thought we wanted or would like to see from various stakeholders involved in this kind of work. And the first question revolved around public authorities. So for us, some of the work that we're working on is really trying to advance target setting in Canada. So of course, we need the leadership of scientists to have credible targets in Canada. But as Agriculture and Agri-Food presented at the original day of this symposium, our GHG emissions in agriculture are really going in the wrong direction. And that's in terms of emissions themselves, but also in terms of carbon sequestration, significantly reducing en route to the Paris Accord. For us, if we can have strong targets in agriculture, sectoral targets, there's different ways we could set them, but if we could have strong targets, then we could have a strong policy roadmap that helps us get there, and it could be set and measured against those targets. In terms of the public policy roadmap, there's lots of important opportunities within the Canadian Agricultural Partnership for improvements, And I think we think a lot about the cost share programs associated with agro-environmental incentives for producers. And I've heard a lot of our peers today and throughout the week talk about some of these, the fact that farmers do indeed need some payments to support them kind of in the risks of adopting new practices. But I'd like to move to the next slide because I want to focus on something new that I haven't yet heard anybody say, well, I don't think I've heard anybody yet mention in the context of this symposium. And it's something that I've been giving a lot of thought to and trying to engage with as many people as I can. So why not take this opportunity? One of the most significant components of our public policy in agriculture is the risk management programs. So they demand about, well, much more than half of the public funding that goes to agriculture. And the purpose of these programs is to provide income support when producers face risks, either from markets or from natural disasters or extreme weather events. That said, our current risk management programs are not delivered to encourage risk-reducing behaviors or to encourage increased resilience on farms. And we all know that improving soil health absolutely plays a role in increasing resilience on farms. So my concern with these programs is that if they don't start to consider increasing climate risks and increasing climate impacts on farms, they will become more expensive for public taxpayers and perhaps become cost prohibitive to provide these really important income support to farmers. So how can we think creatively to innovate these risk management programs in Canada so that they do indeed encourage risk reducing or resilience building practices on farms that are related to soil health? I'm not the first to think about this. So in fact, in the US, if we have US colleagues on the line, there is a bill in front of US Congress, well, at least it was in front of US Congress before COVID, called the Agriculture Resilience Act. And within, well, if it's passed, it would authorize the USDA to offer performance-based crop insurance discounts for practices that reduce risk on farms. And some of those practices that are listed, almost all of those practices that are listed, in fact, are things like using cover crops or doing resource-conserving crop rotations, management-intensive rotational grazing, composting, etc. So they're all related to improving soil health. I'd love to see something like this be discussed in Canada because I think there's a huge opportunity to increase adoption of these kinds of practices as a result of the fact that risk management programs are programs that are highly used by farmers. There's a really high adoption rate in Canada. So if we could add some bonus structures, for instance, like crop insurance discounts or increase matching funds in savings accounts for risk management programs, perhaps then we could see the kind of widespread transition we want to see in Canada. So I'd like to move on to slide 11 to just quickly wrap this up. So we were asked, what kinds of supports do we need from different stakeholders? And I think what you've heard from me in this presentation is that I think, of course, we need the leadership from Canadian scientists and other scientists to help us help decision makers create credible targets, to create the kind of data that we need for performance-based policies. So currently in Canada, all of our agricultural policies are design-based, which means that they support the adoption of certain practices rather than the achievement of certain outcomes. And typically performance-based policies are the ideal, they're the desired kind of policy, but they're really hard to implement without enough data. So again, looking to leadership from scientists to generate the kind of data we need to see those policies that could encourage widespread transition. And then, of course, there's always a need for farmer-scientist partnerships on the farm to get the kind of practical data we need to see improvements in Canada. If we move on to the next slide, slide 12, quickly, I'd just like to mention that I think there's an important opportunity to get support from other economic actors who have the potential to reward low risk and low emission approaches. So if I think about banks who offer mortgages, loans to farmers, what if those were tied to soil health as being something that adds value? What if low soil health was associated with higher risk for investments? What if land valuation had something to do with the quality of your soil health, because we know that it can help with yields and resilience, et cetera. then the other two bubbles, you know, that's insurance and government risk management programs. So I think I've covered that enough already, but essentially to say, what if these kinds of financial tools as well also incentivize soil health approaches that reduce risk and encourage resilience? And then finally, I'll just move on to slide 13. The question was, well, what are we asking of farmers? And I think for me and the work that we're doing at Equiterre and with all of our other partners, predominantly we're asking ourselves actually, what can we do for farmers to support them? And that's indeed the raison d'etre of Farmers for Climate Solutions. As you can see here, that's Gil. She's a producer who presented at the Regen Soil Symposium. And she's one of the lead spokespeople for this campaign in Canada. So finally then, my last slide, Dr. Paul Zhu, you asked us a question around what are the opportunities for 4 per thousand support, and I thought, well, I have some ideas. So I hope this isn't overwhelming. I think that this is an opportunity, really having this kind of gathering is an excellent opportunity to create a roadmap and identify opportunities to continue to work together. So some of the things I reflected upon were accountability of signatories. So for example, Canada is a signatory of 4 per thousand, and I think we can all say that we're really proud that Canada is a signatory. However, that said, our data on soil carbon sequestration and just greenhouse gases more generally in agriculture are going in the opposite direction of what 4 per thousand strives for. So how can 4 per thousand support our governments and all of our sector stakeholders in helping to get towards what 4 per thousand is aspiring for across the world? What about support and target setting? So I mentioned that as being an important component of a path forward. I wonder if there's an opportunity to work together there, considering 4 per thousand is based on a target. Policy mapping. The US has an awesome tool that maps different states that have policies that support soil health. We don't have something like that in Canada, and I haven't seen something like that around the world. Maybe there's an opportunity to create something like that, because for those of us who are thinking about policies, specifically decision makers, I think it would be really interesting and exciting to have one centralized tool that helps identify what other jurisdictions are doing, because that always helps to inspire change at home. What about shared advocacy to our governments? I can't thank 4 per thousand enough to think of having a regional gathering like this. I think this helps to create cross-border collaborations that help all of us continue to advance in the right direction. And then finally, I'll just mention alliances with food industries. So as my friend Gabrielle BASTIEN mentioned in her presentation earlier, the food industry and consumer choice really does have a lot of influence over farmers. And I'm wondering if by working all together, especially with the food industry, is there a way in which we can trigger quicker change through the market? So thanks all for your time, and thanks especially to 4 per thousand and Regen Canada for initiating this gathering.
Thank you very much, Karen, for this presentation. A bit long, but well, you answer very important question for us, and also you make you fill the gap with tomorrow, where we will listen from the company, and this is also very important. I just would like to let you know that we are working, and I present that the first day, we are working on our strategic plan in the 4 per thousand initiative, and those strategic plan will be declined in objectives, and each objective will have a target for 2030, 2050, and they will have an action plan behind, involving all kind of partners, and mainly we are thinking to develop a huge dashboard that will encompass all those data at the international level. But we need partners for that. It's a project, but I think it's going in the right direction. Thank you very much, Karen, for this presentation. So we bring us to the end of the presentation for this session. Then we have a little bit less than 30 minutes for question and answer. I would like Sarah or Antonius to launch the questionnaire. So during that period of time, you will have these windows will just pop up, and you will see a multiple choice question. You will have the entire time of the Q&A to answer them by choosing one or more answers for each question, 3 maximum when you can have the possibility to choose more than one. And you must answer all the questions before you can submit your full answer. The result of this questionnaire will be communicated later because we don't want to influence the result of each session, because some questions are common, the other one are different. So the common question we would like not to have influenced you. The poll is bilingual, so please read the question to the end. It starts with the French and it continues with the English. Right, so let's go for some questions now. Starting with Mamta. I think she was the most patient because all speakers can just put their camera on again, so that will help us to see them. And so let's look for the first question. Some question for Mamta. How can you support a plant-based diet while still wanting to regenerative agriculture to include cattle production? This is a common question about how we can change diet, but we also know, and that Seth tried to demonstrate that we need also livestock in the whole production system. So how is this compatible? Mamta, you have the floor.
Yeah, so I've also answered that in that Q&A chat box, but let me again brief you about that. So again, Drawdown, look, every solution is a system. So, and also the way we are defining plant-rich diet is that we are not saying that you totally avoid eating, or avoid meat consumption. It is about that how you can have, and the plant-rich diet is, instead of focusing on the meat, it is focusing on a healthy and nutritious diet of 2,500 kilocalorie for every people, whether it is in the developing world or developed world. In fact, we realize that the protein intake in the developing world is much lesser. So there it's a more need that people should take more and more of protein-based commodities. But having said that, so it means you don't have to literally, decline your livestock production. It's just that you have to reduce it and replace it more of the plant-based thing. But still we need to produce livestock, and that's why we have solutions like regenerative agriculture that includes silvopasture and managed grazing, which is a better way of raising livestock compared to the conventional ones, so that we can have lesser emissions associated with them. So that's all about related to that plant-rich thing.
Thank you, Mamta. A question for Gabrielle. Well, there are 2 questions, but there seems to be that they are quite similar. They're talking about the Drawdown Institute implemented the certification of regenerative organic label. It seems that all of those paperwork is most of the time is very heavy for the farmers, and that could be more on the commercial company to have the burden on their shoulder. So what if so-called conventional agro-industry had to certify itself about its carbon imprint instead of having a certification? I mean, just reverse the things. Instead of having the farmers, the burden on the farmers, put the burden on the company. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, thank you for this. This is a very big question. And, as I mentioned, we think that recognition of regenerative products is a really important issue. And, certification is one way to go about this. And we're really glad to see initiatives like the regenerative organic certification arise. We think that can contribute to driving the movement. And that said, as was raised for this specific one and potentially for others too, there are barriers in terms of the cost, the bureaucratic aspects, the paperwork, etc. So it might remain, a small proportion of farms that might be certified. And then, about having the conventional sector have to certify their carbon footprint. Well, I agree with the thinking, right? Because why not have it shouldn't be more complicated for the people doing the good work. So why not have like polluters payers or something? So I understand the thinking. I think, we're probably far from having the conventional sector having to certify their carbon footprint at this stage. But that said, we think that there are potentially other ways, other ways to have recognition of regenerative products. And we're really interested to explore, you know, how this could be kind of more democratic, allow for more farms to be so-called certified, even though it might not be a certification. I think there are interesting initiatives to take inspiration from, among others, you know, the Soil Carbon Initiative in the US. And so that's why, you know, we really believe in this kind of collaborative approach of consulting with different members in the industry and in our network to try to find these solutions. So we're looking forward to exploring this.
Okay, thank you. And it's sure that we have to work with the company, but if they want to work with us, and they have some sign after what we are experiencing at the moment with the COVID, that the company want to change the way of improving the value chain and the work with the farmers. I'm sure that we will go in the right direction, but it might take time. And as it was said before, we don't have much time. Klaus, for you, there is a question about with the average household emission being compensated by equal distribution in average of carbon fees. Do you think that motivate households to lower their emission?
Yeah, because it increases the cost of energy products of all kinds, and it stimulates the economy because the dividend is being paid back on an average basis, and high-income households consume more energy than low-income households, so the dividend disproportionately favors low-income households. So low-income households are getting proportionately more money back than they spend on the additional energy, but they can save money by exiting the energy consumption. So that's the theory behind the carbon fee and dividends that we have in our bill.
Thank you. Seth, there's a very quick question because you show us a large sketch about the history, the human history, or the history of our planet. What caused the desertification in the first place? Is it animal grazing?
No, it's lack of animals.
Sorry?
It's lack of animals. It's over rest. It was the decimation of the great herds that caused the deserts, combined with fire. So those two things, fire and the decimation of the great megafauna herds is what caused the deserts. So animals don't create the deserts. The lack of animals creates deserts. Animals restore the deserts in their natural habitat, or when they're managed properly, livestock as a facsimile of the herds, that they can restore the deserts as we're seeing.
Okay. For Karen, there is a question, but you are more involved in Canada, but a question raised and said, is there a US group that does what Farmer for Climate Solution is doing?
Yes, absolutely. We're very inspired by this group. They're called the Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. I believe I got that right. I'll provide it to the group by chat, I hope. But I think that's it. They're an excellent group, and I'd recommend anybody in the US to look at some of their policy recommendations too.
Okay, so you will give us the contact, and we will provide it to all the participants.
Thank you.
What else do we have as a question? Well, another question for Seth. You show very impressive picture about these North Dakota farmers rising from 2% to 8% of soil organic matter. Well, mainly these farmers was involved with livestock. That's what you explained. Did he work also with the crops? And what is his recipe for this miracle?
Yeah, well, he does everything, and he does all the right things, and he has a great book. It's called Dirt to Soil. So the man's name is Gabe Brown. His book is called Dirt to Soil. The subtitle is One Family's Journey into Regenerative Agriculture. But basically, it was the holistic planned grazing that really got the system recovering quickly. It was already recovering, anyway, because he stopped doing the deleterious practices. The tillage, the chemicals, the traditional, he's surrounded by the traditional soybean, industrial soybean agriculture. He's surrounded by that. So he stopped doing the bad way. And that kind of stopped the bleeding, if you will. But then he began to bring in the grazing. And when he brought in the grazing and the proper rotation with the cropping and the cover cropping, that's when it really started to take off. And if you look at that as an example, he hasn't given up cropping. He still grows soybeans, but he grows them as a cover crop and in a rotation with the grazing. But then, of course, he doesn't do tillage, so there's no tilling. So he's a success story because he shows you can still do your cropping and your grazing together. It's not one or the other. So that's why it's really such a success story.
There is a question from Mamta. She answered directly on the Q&A windows, but I think it's important to have it public for all the people. It concerned the question of the use of synthetic nitrogen in plant-based agriculture. And the person asked you if it is not, you do not consider that problem as big as, or even a bigger issue than grazing livestock.
I mean, as I mentioned in my answer, that both are equally important, addressing issues, whatever emissions which are there from the agriculture sector, whether it is deforestation, methane emissions, nitrous oxide emissions, everything has to be resolved with the solution that already exists. So as part of, challenge to address the emissions associated with synthetic fertilizers, we have solutions called nutrient management, and I've given a link of that to get more detail about that. Plus there are other solutions, for example, conservation agriculture, improved rice production. They all have, sub-component which is talking about nutrient management, which is, how, right time, right amount, and right place of nutrient, what you have to apply on your soil thing. And the other thing which the person has asked is about, I forgot, is there any other part of the question?
No, that was just a comparison between the use of synthetic nitrogen in the plant-based agriculture and the relation or the importance in the grazing with the grazing livestock.
Yeah, so that's what, even on silvopasture saying, which is, an integrated system of trees with livestock, you need less amount of synthetic fertilizers. And we are trying to even avoid that by more of using of, having green manuring or maybe leguminous plants in between. So there is a possibility, and all those success stories are there, that you can move away from synthetic fertilizers and have a system which addressing both methane as well as nitrous oxide emissions, both in the cropland as well as grassland. Thank you.
Thank you. Gab, there is a question about your relation with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Are you in good relation with them or not?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, as I mentioned, I think I typed a response. So we're very lucky to count Denis Anger as one of our advisors. So he's a soil scientist at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and has been a supporter since our beginnings. And yeah, among other things, they've been present at our symposiums, sometimes as speakers, but as participants as well. There's currently, the Living Lab initiative in Lake Saint-Pierre that's led by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada that we're collaborating in. And yeah, we're always, open to other ways to collaborate and reaching out to them for different projects that we do. So definitely in very good terms.
Thank you, Gab. Klaus, there is a question about, I don't know what is CAFOs. I'm sorry, maybe you understand what it is. How likely is that that large CAFOs and other big ag player will seek and be granted exception for the carbon fee?
Unlikely, because there are too many groups that would weigh in on this. We really like. We have put forth a bill that is neutral in the sense of just increasing the cost of fossil fuels. No, full stop. So That is painful in every business sector we're talking with. You know, I showed you the number of sectors that we are engaged in. In every business sector, there are argumentations of, you know, you're punishing me, you're hurting me, you're increasing my input cost. And I would agree on the one hand that for farmers, for example, to just increase their cost without without making them whole in other ways is not going to work, which is why we are proposing to pay farmers for carbon sequestration and make a revenue stream out of this, and also encourage other forms of investment in the farm. It's of course necessary. The reason why I also personally like the idea of a carbon fee is that it forces a conversation about climate change. You know, because fundamentally, there are so many issues in every sector of the economy, and there are so many efforts to fix things, to fix water, to fix trees, to fix a variety of things that are harmful. But the underlying cause of all of it really is the use of fossil fuels. So by increasing the cost of fossil fuels to the entire economy, that then forces innovation and encourages innovation to replace the use of fossil fuels, whether that's the energy sector or the food sector. Now, in the energy sector, for example, everybody knows that you should lower the thermostat, you should increase your insulation, you should drive an energy efficient car. We don't necessarily have that conversation in the food sector, you know, where the consumer links my personal behavior, my buying decisions, my consumption decision with what that does to the farmer and on the land. So the farmer can't really change until the consumer is ready for this change and participates in the change process. And so we believe that putting a fee on carbon encourages that conversation to take place.
Thank you very much, Klaus. It's clear. We still have 1 minute to complete the questionnaire if you want to. We reached the 30 answer, which is not a record. You could do better than that. So please use the last minute to answer the question again. And just a general question to the one who want to answer to it. That's a subject that come back to during every of our session. The question of biochar. Few of you mentioned that today. Who want to answer the question? What is the importance of biochar according to you in the future of the development of agriculture in the world, and is there a future for that? Who want to answer?
Did you want me to answer? Because it was part of my presentation.
Yeah, if you want, you can start. If somebody else want to.
You see that what's incredible about biochar is it literally locks up the carbon forever. For all practical purposes, it's forever. It's on a geological time scale. It's not on a biological time scale. And, you know, it's like coal. So it serves a lot of purpose in that regard. Plus it has value to the soil. So it's another one of those win-win-win things.
I can add on that, you know,
yes,
if there's a time. Okay, so biochar, as you mentioned, like, you know, it has the per unit maximum carbon storage because of the number of pores it has. And it also, you know, on the soil leads to other benefit, whether in terms of retaining the nutrients and not allowing it to leach out. However, sometimes the question arises that where the feedstock for biochar production will come. So our analysis has shown that there is enough crop residues available, even if you keep aside 40 to 50% for keeping the soil covered as part of our regenerative cropping system, there is still enough amount of the crop residues that is left. And if we can use those, so A, they will reduce the emissions, which is associated with the natural way of decomposition of these crop residues. And B, when they will be incorporated on the soil, they will lead to carbon sequestration. So as part of their complete LCAs, they are a win-win situation.
Okay, thank you. I think this come to the last word will be the last word. That brings us to the end of our session. I would like to thank all our speakers as well as you all for your participation, your question in the questionnaire, not forgetting our translator. Thank you for your loyalty. The first day we were 92, Tuesday we were 80, yesterday 88. Today with the peak was reached at 80 participants. So thank you very much to all. I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow at the same time for our 5th and already last session dedicated to company. So again, I recall you that the Zoom link will be specific to that session. And I will say good day to you all and see you tomorrow. Gab, you want to have the last word?
Just a quick word to thank our panelists again. Thank you so much, Mamta, Karen, Klaus, Seth, for amazing presentations. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed Karen's recommendations, also and ideas of, how can 4 per 1,000 help. So it's great to hear, Paul, that you're going through a strategic planning. Looking forward to pursuing the conversation about all this and really looking forward to seeing you all for tomorrow's session. So bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Paul. Bye-bye.